She's old guard. She can't carry this legacy. I heard my father-in-law say it through the crack in his office door, just as the entire auditorium applauded the name of his niece, an employee of only 8 weeks. The clinking of champagne glasses felt like ice against my skin. Her cobalt blue dress flashed before my eyes, and the promotion I was promised 3 months ago vanished into thin air. But when I saw Madison ignore an urgent plea from our most important client, I knew they had just revealed their fatal flaw. They thought they had gotten rid of me, but the truth is, they had just buried themselves. You won't believe what happened next. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe and let us know where you're listening from in the comments below. The conference room at Sterling Corp always had a specific smell on the day of the annual all-hands meeting. Slightly burnt coffee, freshly printed paper, and the sweet, nervous tension of anticipation. I took a deep breath, trying to slow a heart that was beating faster than usual. This was my 3rd year, and this time, things were going to be different. I sat in my usual spot in the 3rd row, close enough to show I was engaged, but far enough not to seem presumptuous. All around me, conversations buzzed about quarterly metrics, upcoming vacations, and whether the Bears might actually have a shot this season. It was the familiar symphony of a Friday morning at a Chicago firm. I smiled at Diane from accounting as she glided past, her blonde hair pinned in a neat bun. She gave me a knowing wink, a small silent gesture that spoke volumes. The whole company knew. Everyone assumed today was my day. Even I had believed it. 3 months ago, in the rich mahogany of his office, Edward Vance, my father-in-law and the company's CEO, had placed a hand on my shoulder. "Audrey," he'd said, his voice a low, authoritative rumble, "what you've done with the operations department is nothing short of miraculous. You took a tangled mess and turned it into a well-oiled machine. The regional director position, it's yours. We just need to wait for the annual meeting to make it official." That promise had been my fuel for the last 90 days. I'd worked even harder, if that was possible. Late nights perfecting workflows, weekends sacrificed to solve client issues before they could escalate. I did it all, not just for my own ambition, but out of loyalty. To the company, to the family, to the man who had welcomed me, not just as a daughter-in-law, but as a trusted colleague. The lights in the room dimmed, and Edward took the stage. At 65, he still projected an undeniable aura of power, his silver hair impeccably combed, his Brooks Brothers suit fitting him perfectly. He was the embodiment of the old school of leadership, men who built empires on handshakes and gut instinct. "Welcome, everyone," he began, his voice filling the room. He spoke of the year's achievements, of the challenges ahead. I listened intently, but my mind was already racing. I pictured the moment he would call my name, how I would walk up, what my smile would look like, what I would say in my brief acceptance speech. I would thank my team, who had been in the trenches with me. I would thank Edward for his faith in me. And now, Edward's voice pulled me back to the present, for the part of the morning we've all been waiting for. As you know, Sterling Corp is entering a new era, an era that demands innovation, forward thinking, and a data-driven approach to lead us into the future. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. To lead this charge, he continued, a broad smile spreading across his face, I am incredibly proud to announce our new regional director, a brilliant young talent, a recent MBA graduate with top honors from Wharton. Please join me in welcoming my niece, Madison Pierce. The name hung in the air, sharp and cold as a shard of ice. Madison, not Audrey. Time seemed to stop. I could see Madison, Edward's 28-year-old niece, who had been a summer intern just last year and had only been an official employee for 8 weeks, rising from her seat in the front row. She wore a designer cobalt blue dress, her blonde hair perfectly blown out. She turned, and for a split second, our eyes met. I saw a flicker of something that might have been sympathy, but it was quickly swallowed by pride and excitement. Then the applause hit me, a tidal wave of sound. It was distant and muffled, as if I were underwater. Everyone around me was on their feet, clapping enthusiastically. I remained frozen in my seat, my hands rigid in my lap. It felt as if someone had sucked all the air from my lungs. The shock was a cold, numbing sensation that spread from my stomach to my fingertips. This wasn't just a professional disappointment. This was a public betrayal, a slap in the face in front of every person I had worked with, led, and respected. 3 years of hard-won experience, 60-hour work weeks, missed family dinners, all of it erased and dismissed in favor of a brand new MBA and a blood relation. Diane looked back at me, her face a mask of shock and pity. I tried to force a smile, but my facial muscles wouldn't obey. With a Herculean effort, I pushed myself to my feet and began to clap, slowly, mechanically. Each clap was a hollow echo of my humiliation. Edward was on stage, hugging Madison, his pride on full display. He handed her a microphone. Madison's clear, confident voice rang out, speaking of synergy, predictive analytics, and workflow optimization, the trendy business jargon she had learned from a textbook. I didn't hear the rest. There was only one question repeating in my head, an endless, agonizing loop. Why? I tried to slip away after the meeting, hoping to make it back to my office, my sanctuary, before I had to face the looks of pity or the clumsy words of consolation. I wasn't so lucky. "Audrey," Edward's voice called out just as I reached the hallway. I turned, forcing a professional smile onto my face. "Yes, Edward?" "My office, for a moment," he said, his tone leaving no room for refusal. His office was the same as always, grand, imposing, with dark mahogany walls, a massive desk, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. The smell of leather and polished wood had always felt reassuring, but today it felt suffocating. I sat in the leather chair opposite him, the same chair where, 3 months ago, he had promised me the future. "I know today was probably a bit unexpected," he began, steepling his fingers on the desk. "Unexpected is one word for it," I replied, my voice surprisingly calm. The initial shock had given way to a cold, hollow feeling. He sighed, the sigh of a man who believed he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Audrey, you are the best damn operations manager I've ever had. You keep this machine running, flawlessly. No one could do it better. I need you to know that." The praise now felt like salt in an open wound. "Then why, Edward?" "Because," he leaned forward, his eyes intense, "keeping the machine running isn't enough. Not anymore. Sterling Corp needs more. The market is changing too fast. Technology, data, we're falling behind. We need a new vision, a new map, or we'll become obsolete. You keep the ship on course, Audrey, but Madison is going to draw the new map. Do you understand? We need both." I didn't understand. Or rather, I didn't want to. What he was saying was that my experience, my ability to build lasting relationships with clients, my knack for putting out fires before they spread, all of that was just the work of a mechanic. Necessary, but not the person in the captain's chair. "I'll train Madison," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "I'll make sure she has everything she needs to succeed." Edward's face relaxed in relief. "I knew you would. You've always been the dependable one. Your family." Family. The word twisted in my gut. I stood up. "If that's all, I have some reports to get back to." "Of course," he said, clearly glad the awkward conversation was over. I walked out of his office feeling small and invisible. I needed some air, or at least a glass of cold water to steady myself. I headed toward the break room, which was just adjacent to Edward's office. His door was still slightly ajar. As I was filling a glass, I heard a giggle. It was Madison. "I still can't believe it, Uncle Edward. I'm just so excited." "I told you, kiddo," Edward's voice replied, so much warmer and prouder than it had been with me. "You were born for this." I froze, my hand tightening around the glass. I should have walked away. I should have respected their privacy. But I couldn't. I had to hear. I needed the whole, ugly truth. Madison's voice was electric with enthusiasm. "I was up all night sketching out an idea for a real-time churn analysis dashboard. We can use an algorithm to predict which clients are at high risk, segment them by lifetime value, and deploy automated retention campaigns before they even think about leaving. No more guesswork, all data-driven." "Brilliant! Brilliant!" Edward exclaimed. "That's the future. That's the vision I'm talking about." There was a short pause, and then I heard Edward lower his voice, a more somber conspiratorial tone that was not meant for me to hear. "Audrey is reliable," he said. "She's old guard." She keeps things steady, but she lacks the creative spark to take us to the next level. The glass in my hand began to tremble. She's a great captain, he continued, each word a dagger to my self-worth. But she can't be the general to carry this legacy. She can't be the general to carry this legacy. There it was, the final, unvarnished, brutal truth. I wasn't just seen as old. I wasn't just passed over for a relative. I had been judged. I had been weighed, measured, and found wanting. Edward hadn't just made a personnel decision. He had delivered a verdict on my entire value and potential. He looked at me and saw a competent operations manager, someone to keep the wheels turning, but never, ever the person who could take the driver's seat and decide the path forward. The initial shock, the hurt of betrayal, it all melted away, replaced by something else. A cold, crystal-clear rage. It wasn't hot and explosive, but quiet and focused. I set the glass down on the counter, my hand perfectly steady now. I turned and walked away without a sound. Edward Vance had made a critical mistake. He thought I was predictable. He thought I would meekly accept the role of mentor, that I would step aside and be content to keep his machine running smoothly while his new general drew her great theoretical maps. He was wrong. This was no longer about professional pride. It had become a mission to prove his vision wrong. That experience wasn't a liability. That stability wasn't the enemy of innovation. And that a loyal captain, when pushed to the edge, could become a more formidable adversary than any untested general. When I got back to my desk, I looked at the photo of Ben and me, smiling on a summer day at Navy Pier. I would go home tonight and tell him everything. Pulling my Ford Explorer into the garage that evening, it felt like a century had passed since I'd left that morning. Our house in Oak Park, with its old oak trees and sprawling front porch, had always been my sanctuary. But tonight, as I walked through the door, I brought the weight of the corporate world into that peaceful space. Ben was in the kitchen, the smell of BBQ ribs from the grill out back filling the house. He turned, his usual bright smile fading as he saw my face. He didn't say a word. He just walked over, opened his arms, and held me. That's when the dam I'd been building all day finally broke. I buried my face in his shoulder and wept, choking sobs of betrayal, humiliation, and the brutal feeling of being so thoroughly underestimated. We sat at the granite kitchen island as I told him everything, from Edward's speech to the conversation I'd overheard. The more I talked, the more my grief hardened into a steely resolve. Ben listened, his own face dark with anger. He called you old guard? You're 42 and can't carry the legacy? The man doesn't know what he's talking about. The worst part is, I said, my voice steady now, he believes it, Ben. He truly believes a fresh MBA and a few ideas about dashboards can replace real-world experience. That night, long after Ben had gone to bed, I sat at my laptop. The blank screen seemed to mock me, but in my mind, the words were already forming. I didn't write an emotional, bitter screed. I wrote a resignation letter that was professional, clinical, and final. Short to the point, leaving Edward no room to negotiate or manipulate. Every word typed was an act of liberation. The next morning, I put on my most powerful suit, a sharp charcoal gray number. I walked into Sterling Corp with a terrifying calm. I waited until exactly 10 o'clock, after the morning coffee rush had subsided, and walked with the crisp white envelope to Edward's office. His secretary, a kind older woman, smiled at me. "Good morning, Audrey. Go right in. He's alone." Edward looked up from his papers, a little surprised. "Audrey, didn't expect to see you so soon. Is there a problem with Madison?" I walked to his desk and placed the envelope on the polished wood. "I think this is self-explanatory," I said formally. He frowned, took his letter opener, and slit the envelope. His eyes scanned the few short lines. I watched the progression on his face. Curiosity, then confusion, then utter shock, followed by a flush of angry red. "Are you kidding me?" He shot up from his desk, his office chair rolling back. "What is this? Some kind of negotiation tactic for a raise?" "Not at all," I replied, my voice firm. "It's my notice of resignation. I'll serve out the standard 2 weeks." 2 weeks? He almost yelled. "Madison needs you. The company needs you. The Morrison Industries account, who's going to handle them? You can't just walk away. Madison has an MBA from Wharton and is full of innovative ideas, I said, echoing his own words back at him. I'm sure she'll figure it out. He paced behind his desk, running a hand through his silver hair. Listen, I know you're disappointed, but we're family. Family doesn't do this. You're right, I said, standing to leave and looking him straight in the eye. Family doesn't deceive each other. Family doesn't tear each other down behind their backs. You made a decision based on your vision. Now it's time for you to live with the consequences of that vision. The desperation in his eyes hardened into coldness. He stopped pacing and stared at me. You should be careful, Audrey. This is a small town, this Chicago business world. You don't want to burn all your bridges. It's hard for someone your age to find a similar position. The veiled threat hung in the air between us, but it didn't scare me. If anything, it solidified my resolve. Thank you for the advice, I said, turning for the door, but that's a risk I'm willing to take. That evening, driving my Ford Explorer home, I was stuck in gridlock on the Eisenhower Expressway. Traffic was at a standstill, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel frustrated. The endless river of cars, the red brake lights stretching out before me, it all seemed to symbolize the path I had just left, a congested road with no way out. Now I was taking an exit, heading down an unknown road, but it was my own, and that felt like a breathtaking kind of freedom. My last 2 weeks at Sterling Corp felt like walking a tightrope. The office air was thick with rumors and awkwardness. People were clearly divided into two camps. Diane and a few other senior colleagues offered silent support, bringing me coffee or leaving encouraging sticky notes on my keyboard. You did the right thing, one read. But most others, especially the younger employees, kept their distance, their eyes filled with a nervous anxiety, as if my departure were a contagious disease that might threaten their own job security. Handing over my responsibilities to Madison was an exercise in patience. She was smart, I had to give her that. She grasped concepts quickly, but her approach was entirely academic, rigidly by the book. When I explained the nuances of a relationship with a long-term client, how sometimes you had to bend the rules of a process to solve their problem, Madison frowned. But that will skew the data, she said. How can we track efficiency if everyone gets an exception? She didn't understand that business, especially in logistics, was built on people and trust, not just numbers on a dashboard. The greatest strain, however, wasn't at the office. It was at home. Though Ben was fully supportive of my decision, the tension in our extended family was palpable. The phone calls from my mother-in-law became more frequent, filled with passive-aggressive guilt trips. Weekly Sunday dinners at my in-laws' house became a minefield. One evening, after a particularly difficult call with his mother, Ben sank onto the sofa next to me, looking exhausted. I know Dad was wrong, Audrey. Completely wrong, he said, his voice low. But it's tearing our family apart. Mom is in tears. Dad isn't speaking to me. You can't imagine how awkward it is. I took his hand. Ben, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to put you in this position, but I couldn't stay in a place where I was so disrespected. I wouldn't be me anymore. I know, he sighed, resting his head on my shoulder. I just wish it could be different. So did I. But I knew that sometimes, to build a new future, you had to be willing to tear down a part of the past, even when it hurt. The first few weeks after leaving Sterling Corp were a humbling experience. The world I thought I would easily conquer proved to be rather indifferent. I sent out dozens of resumes. A few phone screenings led nowhere. One in-person interview ended with the classic, "We'll be in touch." My confidence began to fray at the edges. Edward's threat about someone my age started to echo in my head like a curse. Then, one afternoon, an email landed in my inbox with the subject line, Horizon Tech, interview invitation for Director of Operations. My heart skipped a beat. Horizon Tech was a rising star in the logistics tech space, known for its innovative culture and rapid growth. The interview was at their office in Fulton Market, a modern, open-concept space that was the polar opposite of Sterling Corp's formal, old-world grandeur. My interviewer was the CEO, a woman named Rebecca Chin, who was about my age, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. The interview was intense and direct. Rebecca had clearly done her homework. I see you had 3 very successful years at Sterling Corp, she said. Why leave at the top of your game? I took a deep breath. This was the moment. I could give a generic, safe answer. Or I could tell the truth. I chose the truth. Because there's a difference between keeping a machine running and deciding where it's going, I said. Sterling Corp decided they needed a strategic vision based on theory more than on practical operational experience. I disagreed with that vision. Rebecca watched me, her expression unreadable. So, how do you define your value? And that's when all the doubt, the hurt, and the determination crystallized into a single clear answer. Strategic ideas are important, I said, my voice finding a new strength, a new passion. Analytical dashboards, predictive algorithms, they're all wonderful. But they are meaningless without the operational excellence and strong client relationships to back them up. A client doesn't call an algorithm when their shipment is stuck at the border. They call a person they trust. I build that trust. I build those relationships. I'm the one who makes sure the grand strategic ideas aren't just pretty lines on a PowerPoint slide. I'm the one who makes them real. A small smile touched Rebecca's lips. That's the best answer I've heard all week. 2 days later, I got the call. It was Rebecca. Audrey, she said, we don't just want you to keep our machine running. We want you to help us build it bigger, better, and faster. Welcome to Horizon Tech. When I hung up the phone, I didn't shout for joy. I just stood there, in the quiet of my living room, and let the feeling of relief and validation wash over me. This wasn't just a new job. This was the start of a new chapter. One where my experience wasn't dismissed as old guard, but was seen for what it was, an invaluable asset. My first day at Horizon Tech felt like stepping into a different universe. The atmosphere at Sterling Corp had always been formal, almost hushed, where important conversations happened behind closed oak doors. Here at Horizon Tech's Fulton Market office, the air practically vibrated with energy. It was an open-plan workspace, flooded with natural light from massive windows, with exposed industrial pipes running along the high ceilings. People wore jeans and company-branded t-shirts, walked around with artisanal coffee, and brainstormed loudly at mobile whiteboards covered in diagrams and code. My initial fear of being the old guard in a forest of young tech talent quickly evaporated, replaced by a sense of thrilling challenge. Here, value was measured in results, not age or pedigree. Still, I had a steep learning curve. They spoke a different language, full of tech acronyms and agile methodologies I'd only read about. The young man who sat across from me, a data engineer named Mark, could type code faster than I could think, and occasionally glanced at me over his curved monitor with a look of curious skepticism. My first real test came sooner than I expected, at the end of my first week. Rebecca called me into her glass-walled office. Audrey, I'm not going to sugarcoat this, she said, pushing a thick file across her desk. This is the Anderson Group account. They're one of our earliest clients, but they're about to walk. Poor communication, constant delays. They've lost all faith. It's yours. It was a test, and we both knew it. Giving a dying account to a new hire was a risk, but it was also a clear signal. Rebecca wanted to see what I could do under real pressure. For the next week, I did nothing but immerse myself in the world of the Anderson Group. I read every email, reviewed every incident report in our system, and spoke to every team member who had ever worked with them. Mark, the data engineer, was less than helpful. The data tells the story, he said bluntly in a quick meeting. Our on-time delivery rate for them dropped 8% last quarter. My model shows a 92% probability they'll terminate the contract. We should be focusing our resources on higher potential clients. Does your model show why the rate dropped, Mark? I asked gently. He shrugged. Could be a system glitch, could be the carrier. It's a variable. I wasn't looking for a tech breakthrough or a magic algorithm. I was simply trying to understand. Where was their pain? I spent hours on the phone, not with executives, but with the warehouse managers and shipping coordinators at the Anderson Group. I listened to them complain about our clunky user interface, about not being able to reach a human being when something went wrong, about feeling like just another number. The meeting with the Anderson Group's leadership took place in a sterile boardroom at their headquarters, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. 3 men in dark suits sat across from me, their faces set in a mask of frustration and fatigue. Miss Wallace, the leader, Mr. Henderson began, We've had meetings like this 6 times in the last year. We've heard enough promises about new features and system updates. Give us one reason why this time is any different. I didn't open my laptop. I didn't have a slide deck. I just looked him in the eye. Mr. Henderson, I'm not going to make you any promises, I said calmly. Instead, I want to tell you what I've heard from your team. I heard that your critical shipment to Asia was 3 days late last month because of a paperwork error at the port, costing you a $50,000 subcontract. I heard your warehouse manager, a man named Frank, had to call 3 times and wait on hold for a total of 45 minutes just to get a status update on a domestic shipment. And I heard that no one has been listening to your concerns about our system's incompatibility with your inventory management software. Am I correct? Silence filled the room. The 3 men glanced at each other, their stony expressions softening slightly. Surprise was evident in their eyes. I hadn't talked about our data. I had talked about their pain. Yes, Mr. Henderson finally admitted. That's fairly accurate. Then here is what we're going to do, I continued, pulling out a single sheet of paper and a pen. Starting tomorrow, you and Frank will have my personal cell phone number. Any issue, no matter how small, you call me directly. Second, we will set up a daily digest report emailed to you at 8 a.m., summarizing the status of all your active shipments. No jargon, just clear, understandable information. Third, I am personally coming to visit your warehouse next Wednesday. Not to sell you anything, but to sit with Frank and watch his workflow, to understand your process from the ground up. I didn't propose a new dashboard or an AI system. I proposed basic human decency, accountability, and communication. I proposed experience. At the end of the hour-long meeting, Mr. Henderson stood up and extended his hand. Miss Wallace, he said, and for the first time I saw the hint of a smile. You've given us a reason to reconsider. That was just the beginning. I visited their warehouse the next week, spending the morning watching and listening. I found several small system incompatibilities that no data model could have ever flagged. We made a few small changes. I called Mr. Henderson once a week just to check in. Slowly, the wall of ice between our two companies began to thaw. 1 month later, the Anderson Group didn't just stay. They signed an expanded contract, doubling their business with us. The news spread through Horizon Tech like wildfire. At the next all-hands meeting, Rebecca publicly praised my work. Audrey showed us that the most advanced technology is meaningless if we forget the human element, she said. As I walked past Mark's desk later, he looked up and gave me a slight nod, a reluctant but genuine acknowledgement. I didn't have to prove my worth with words anymore. The results spoke for themselves. While I was rebuilding trust, one client at a time at Horizon Tech, the legacy Edward Vance was so afraid of becoming obsolete was beginning to fracture. News travels fast in the logistics world, and the whispers about Sterling Corp grew louder. I read a small blurb in the Chicago Business Journal that the company was undergoing a period of restructuring, a corporate euphemism for chaos. The call came on a Tuesday morning. It was Daniel Morrison, the CEO of Morrison Industries, Sterling Corp's largest and most loyal client. Audrey, sorry to bother you at your new company, he said, his voice thick with exhaustion and frustration. But I'm at my wit's end, and you're the only person I could think of who would understand. It's no problem, Daniel. What's going on? I asked, a sense of dread settling in my stomach. We have a $2 million shipment stuck at the Port of Long Beach, a customs documentation issue. It happens, you know that. In the old days, I'd make one call to you. It could be midnight, you'd pick up, and you'd start working the problem. It would be handled, quietly and efficiently, within hours. He paused, sighing heavily. Last week I called your replacement, Madison. She was very polite. She listened. And then you know what she said? She said, Mr. Morrison, could you please submit a formal ticket through our customer portal, detailing the issue and attaching all relevant documents? That way we can systematically track the incident, ensure data integrity, and analyze process weaknesses for future improvement. I closed my eyes. I could picture the scene perfectly. It was a textbook MBA answer and a catastrophic customer relations blunder. She was talking about data collection while his ship was on fire. Daniel, I'm so sorry. I told her it was an emergency. He practically shouted. $2 million baking in the California sun, and she wants me to fill out an online form? I tried getting through to Edward, but he just defended his niece, saying this was the new process to ensure consistency and scalability. Audrey, I don't need scalability. I need someone to solve my problem, now. That was the final straw. 2 weeks later, the news broke officially. Morrison Industries had terminated its decades-long contract with Sterling Corp and moved to a competitor. For a company like Sterling, losing its anchor client was like blowing a hole in the hull below the waterline. Madison's data-driven strategic vision had failed its first major test against the harsh reality of an unanswered phone call. Soon, other clients, accustomed to the personal touch I had cultivated, began to follow suit. The Sterling Corp ship wasn't just fractured anymore, it was taking on water. On a Thursday evening, as I was helping my daughter with her math homework, my phone rang with a desk number I recognized instantly: Sterling Corporation. I hesitated, a complex mix of curiosity and apprehension washing over me, before answering. Audrey? The voice on the other end was trembling, frantic. It's me, Diane. Diane, what's wrong? Are you okay? No, not at all, she sobbed, and I could hear chaos in the background. The rumors are true, Audrey. They just announced it. They're starting layoffs tomorrow. A third of the company. They're saying it's because we lost the Morrison account and the others. Everyone is saying it's because you left. Diane, that's not my fault, I said gently, though a pang of guilt twisted inside me. My departure was the symptom, not the cause, but that didn't make the news any less heartbreaking. I know, she said quickly. We all know why you left. Edward made a mistake. But Audrey, I've been here for 20 years. My husband just lost his job last month. We have our mortgage on the house in Oak Park, and our son's tuition at U of I. Who's going to hire a 58-year-old accountant? The raw despair in her voice was almost suffocating. For a fleeting, dark moment, I felt a flicker of bitter satisfaction, the thought that Edward was getting what he deserved for his arrogance. But it was quickly replaced by a profound sense of sorrow and compassion. This wasn't about Edward or Madison. This was about Diane, about good, hard-working people caught in the storm of poor leadership. They were the collateral damage in a war I never wanted to start. I didn't hesitate. Diane, listen to me, I said, my voice firm and clear. Calm down and listen. Get out a pen and paper. Horizon Tech is growing fast. We're hiring, especially in finance as we onboard these new clients. I want you to update your resume tonight. Send it to me the second it's done. Do you hear me? There was a stunned silence on the other end, punctuated by a soft sniffle. You would do that? After everything? This has nothing to do with everything, I replied. This has to do with you being a damn good, hardworking accountant. Any company would be lucky to have you. Just send me the resume. After I hung up, I sat in silence for a long moment, staring out the window at the falling autumn leaves. Ben came in and put a hand on my shoulder. Everything okay? I nodded, a sad smile on my face. I think so, I said. I think in the end, this isn't about winning or losing. It's about helping people find a place where they're valued. And in that moment, I realized that a true legacy isn't about a company or a title. It's about the small acts of kindness and respect you leave behind, even as you forge your own path forward. 6 months after I started at Horizon Tech, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived in my mailbox, standing out from the usual bills and junk mail. There was no return address, just the Sterling Corp logo embossed in gold in the corner. My hand trembled slightly as I tore it open. Inside was a formal invitation, printed on heavy cardstock whose weight I could feel. The looping script invited Mrs. Audrey Wallace and guest to the Sterling Corp annual awards dinner at the prestigious Drake Hotel. I stared at it for a long time, a mixture of disbelief and curiosity swirling within me. What was Edward's game? Was this an olive branch, an attempt at reconciliation, or was it a trap, a public effort to pin the company's downfall on me? That night, I showed the invitation to Ben. He read it and set it on the kitchen island as if it were toxic. You're not going, are you? He asked, his voice protective. Why would you put yourself in that situation? I think I have to, I replied softly. He looked at me as if I'd just suggested we go for a swim in Lake Michigan in January. Audrey, why? After everything he did to you? To us? I took a deep breath, trying to put my tangled emotions into words. Because the woman he invited isn't the woman who left Sterling Corp 6 months ago. That woman left hurt and full of doubt. I'm different now. I'm not going for him, Ben. I'm going for me. I need to look that woman who walked out of there in pain 6 months ago in the eye and tell her, we made it. I need to close that chapter for good. Ben looked into my eyes for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Okay, he said. Then we'll go together. The night of the event, I chose a dress not to impress, but to feel powerful. It was an emerald green silk sheath, simple but elegant, that made me feel grounded and confident. As Ben and I walked into the grand ballroom of the Drake, I felt a surprising sense of calm. The atmosphere at the party was completely different from previous years. The glamour was still there, the crystal chandeliers, the tables draped in crisp white linen, but the life was gone. The room was only half full. The conversations were hushed and strained. People's smiles didn't seem to reach their eyes. It felt like an elaborately staged performance of success, but everyone knew the stage itself was rotting from within. Edward was standing at the entrance, greeting guests. When he saw me, a complex expression crossed his face. Surprise, a hint of shame, and perhaps even relief. He looked much older than he had 6 months ago. The lines around his eyes were deeper. His posture seemed to have slumped slightly under the weight of his suit. Audrey. Ben. Thank you for coming, he said, his voice a little hoarse. The awards ceremony was a perfunctory affair, praising small accomplishments, trying to inflate minor wins. Madison sat at the main family table, looking small and uncomfortable, a world away from the confident, ambitious woman I'd seen on stage. Then came the final surprise. And our last award of the night, Edward announced, his voice carrying through the quiet room, is a new one, the Legacy of Leadership Excellence Award. This award is for someone who may no longer be with us, but whose impact continues to shape how we do business. My stomach dropped. Please welcome to the stage Audrey Wallace. The room erupted in applause, and this time it was genuine. As I walked to the stage, I could see Diane, who was now thriving at Horizon Tech and seated at our company's table, smiling and clapping wildly. Edward handed me a heavy crystal trophy. He took the microphone. I was so afraid of Sterling Corp becoming a relic that I made the wrong bet, he said, his voice cracking with emotion, speaking not just to me, but to the whole room. I confused a good idea with true leadership. He turned to me. Audrey, you were the one who could carry this legacy, and I was too blind to see it. Then he handed the microphone to me. The room held its breath. This was my moment. I could have spoken words of bitterness. I could have pointed out his failures. But as I looked out at the familiar faces, I no longer felt anger, only a sense of peace. Thank you, Edward, I began, my voice steady. Working at Sterling Corp taught me invaluable lessons. I learned that experience isn't the enemy of innovation, but its foundation. I learned that a client's trust can't be measured on a dashboard, but is built one phone call, one solved problem at a time. And most importantly, I paused, looking directly at Edward. I learned that a leader's true worth isn't in carrying on a legacy, but in knowing her own value. I handed the microphone back. After dinner, as Ben and I were getting ready to leave, Edward approached our table. Audrey, could I have a word with you alone for a moment? Ben nodded and stepped away. I meant it, Edward said, his voice laced with desperation. Come back. Any title, any terms. I need you. I looked at the man who had once been my formidable boss, whose approval had meant everything to me. Now, I just saw a tired, frightened man. Thank you, Edward, I said softly, but I've found where I belong. I can't build a future on a rotten foundation. I wish you and the company the best of luck. I turned and walked back to Ben, feeling a profound sense of closure. It wasn't the triumphant feeling of victory, but the quiet peace of release. A few months later, on a crisp autumn evening, Ben and I were sitting on the back patio of our house in Oak Park. The kids were in bed. The cool air smelled of damp leaves. We were sharing a bottle of wine, watching the last of the oak leaves spin in the breeze before settling gently on the lawn. We weren't talking about work. We were talking about a camping trip we were planning for the weekend, about a movie we wanted to see, about whether we should finally repaint the kitchen. Life had returned to normal, but it was a better, lighter version of normal. In a quiet moment, I thought about the crystal trophy from Sterling Corporation. It wasn't on our bookshelf. It was packed away in a box in the basement, next to other old memorabilia. It wasn't a prize to be displayed, but a relic of a closed chapter, a reminder of the journey I had taken. The true legacy Edward had been so worried about, I realized, wasn't a brick and mortar company, and neither was mine. It wasn't in the title on my business card or the numbers on a quarterly report. It was right here, in this peaceful moment, next to the man I loved. It was in the peace, happiness, and self-respect I had fought so hard to reclaim. And that was a legacy worth fighting for. If you found this story compelling, please like the video, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. To listen to the next story, click the video on the left. Thanks for listening.